And we're back, and I'm starting this new series where I read classical comics and analyze them and see if they hold up to today's modern standards or if we just like them for the nostalgia. And I think I'm going to make some people on the internet mad. So, without further ado, let's talk comics. This week, we're starting out with The Dark Knight, specifically The Dark Knight Returns, because if you look at this comic, it's broken up into a few sections, so we're going to take it section by section, nice and slow. Now, this comic was written by Frank Miller, and it was published in 1986. A cool 6 years before this gal was born, so I thought it would be a good place to start, because it is an OG Batman comic, and in my book, there is a foreword by Alan Moore, and I don't need to tell you who Alan Moore is, of course. But I thought it was really interesting to start out with this foreword because Alan Moore really hails Frank Miller for writing this gritty Batman and taking Batman from a funny vigilante a la Adam West to something really gritty. And I think that that's interesting because a couple of reasons. One, I've never lived in a world where Batman was anything but gritty. Right? Every Batman comic that I read is about his trauma and his revenge and all of those things, and I'm very used to I am the night, sorry Christian Bale, that was really bad. And so I thought it was interesting to see Alan Moore, who has more recently than 1986 come out and said gritty comics used to have their place, but they're tired now. And so it's really interesting to see where comics have come, right? And for the most part, I won't keep you hanging. For the most part, I think this comic holds up. There are a lot of really great things about this comic that if you take yourself and put yourself in 1986, if you can, if you sort of read this comic and understand where more modern Batman comics came from, a lot of it came from this. And so I think that that's really interesting, sort of reading the source material, if you will. Of course, there were Batman comics before this, but in terms of the gritty stuff, this was a real landmark comic. But there are some things in this comic that I could hard pass on, and we'll get to those things. Let's talk about the stuff I really liked first, and the stuff that I found really interesting having not ever read this comic all the way through, right? My dad used to own a comic book shop, and he gifted this to me. It's signed, which is cool. Apparently only 4,000 of them were made according to the inside of this book. I'm probably not supposed to read it. I'm probably supposed to collect it, but I'm somebody who can't, books are meant to be read. I feel like I'd be doing it a disservice if I didn't open it and I didn't read it, right? So I'm reading it. So we'll start with the premise of the book, because if you're a fan of the movies, if you're a fan of the movies, it's a little different, right? It does pull a lot of stuff from here, but it's different. And we start out with Bruce Wayne with a hella good Tom Selleck mustache. We need more superheroes with mustaches. I'm looking at you, Superman. I saw Henry Cavill with that mustache. Anyway, Batman hasn't been Batman for 12 years. Basically, the deal is he retired. They're not sure if he died. But basically, Bruce defeated Harvey Dent, or was able to get him into police custody so he could go and recover in a psychiatric ward. And it's really interesting because we meet Harvey Dent after he's already been Two-Face. He already went insane. He already did the thing where he flips the coin and decides if people live or die. And now he's been in a psychiatric ward where he has received help and surgery, and come to find out Bruce Wayne paid for all that rehabilitation. We sort of culminate in where the reader sees Harvey Dent for the first time in this really cool sort of double panel way. The first couple times you see him, he's split down the middle in two panels, which I thought was really a good way to be illustrative of Two-Face, right? I've seen Two-Face in many comics since then, and so it was cool to see. It's just cool to see. And he's being released from the psychiatric ward. Allegedly, he's much better now. His psychologist says he's doing great. But Commissioner Gordon, who's old, he's turning 70, and he's about to retire, says that this is a terrible idea. While all of that is going on, we have Bruce Wayne deeply in need of an antidepressant. My guy, may I offer you Wellbutrin? Non-spawn. And Gotham is the Gotham that I've always known, where it's crime-ridden, and there is a gang in the street called the Mutants, and I'm like, whoa, wrong franchise, but there's nothing to suggest that they're actual mutants, they're just called the Mutants. That's terrorizing the city, right? Bad things, murders, etc., etc. Batman, nowhere to be found. And a few times throughout this comic, which is something I do not love, both Gordon and Alfred, who's there and as cool as ever, say to Bruce Wayne that he just needs to find a woman. No. No! Do not send us your broken, psychologically ill men who, like, can't deal with their emotions. I don't mean, like, mental illness. I mean, like, you need therapy, right? No. It's not our job to clean up your mess. Pick up your socks off the floor, go to therapy, drink some water, and come call me when you're not crusty and you know how to be vulnerable. Thank you. Even you, Bruce Wayne. But as we're getting to know Bruce, and we're seeing some really iconic sort of Batman imagery, like the Bat Cave, the time that he fell into the cave and saw the bats and was so scared and sort of had that real landmark moment. All of those things that are really indicative of Batman and that I'm used to seeing are here in this comic because this is where they came from. And I think that that's really cool. And something I really liked, and I don't see in a lot of modern comics about Batman, is this sort of, you know, you hear a lot about how Batman, he's just like the dudes he kicks butts of, you know, he's tortured, blah, blah, blah. But, like, in this comic, they really treat the Batman and Bruce Wayne as two separate entities. Two sides of the same coin. That's a Two-Face joke for you. They make it a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde sort of situation where you have Bruce Wayne and then you have the Batman sort of in the back of his mind, like saying, you can't ignore me, you can't ignore these urges, like, I will come forward and, like, there's nothing you can do about it, like, I know you're trying to hide me. And I thought that was so interesting because it really does make that line between Batman and the people he's fighting against so thin. I think thin in a way I haven't really seen, because in modern comics, in modern Batman comics, the ones that I've read, I'm going to caveat this with, I'm not like one of those people who reads every single Batman comic. So, there you go. But in the modern comics that I've read, you take for granted that Bruce Wayne and Batman are one entity. And that he does this because, yeah, he is kind of troubled, but also, like, he's a good guy, he's doing the right thing. And here, it's a little more murky, I would say, in a very interesting way. And not only are you contending with that, sorry, this sweater is very fuzzy. Not only are you contending with that, but also Bruce, I believe, is in his late 50s in this comic, and I came to that conclusion, one, because he complains about being old sometimes, and also because we do see that iconic scene where his parents are killed, the one where the pearls break and go all over the floor, like, you know the one. And in that scene, he is seeing the movie Zorro, which came to theaters in 1940. So if I guesstimate that he's about 10 years old when his parents are killed, then 1940 to 1986, and then 10 years on that, we got somewhere in his 50s, give or take, right? That's kind of old to be fighting crime. So not only are we dealing with the fact that he's retired after he did the whole dent thing, but he's aging, right? And you can see him pulling away from everybody. You know, Clark calls him on the phone. He's like, hey, I'm going to be out of town, Superman. Selena Kyle calls him, I think, for a booty call, which he ignores. Bruce, are you dumb? But you can see that he's just kind of pulling away. He's having a hard time. The Batman's talking to him, and you can tell that he's definitely sort of on the precipice of something. Of course, if he weren't, we wouldn't have much more comic to read. So he does become the comic, because after Harvey Dent is let out of the psychiatric hospital, despite his psychologist saying, oh, he's all good to go, and Commissioner Gordon is full of it for not believing that he's fine, of course, Batman figures out that Harvey Dent is in cahoots with the mutants, that gang, and is sort of just causing trouble again, and being the reason for murder time. But the Joker's also in on it, so that's fun. We do get to see a little bit of the Joker, who it seems, in a really sort of interesting way, again, in modern comics it's said, but this was really an illustrative way to show sort of the Joker looking really normal in a psyche for the criminally insane. He's in a place for the criminally insane. He looks fine, and then he reads and sees that the Batman has come back, and he gets those sort of over-dramatized Joker features, the wide smile, the sharp cheekbones, and it just happens in sort of a series of 4 or so panels, and I thought that that was also really cool. You know, the Joker exists to be the foil to the Batman, and that was a really illustrative way of showing that, and I appreciate it. He, in The Dark Knight Returns, doesn't have like a huge role, because it's more of like what's going on with Harvey Dent, but I am excited to see where that goes. The Joker always makes me feel a little trepidatious because he's a much beloved character, and he's an absolute, like, he's just, ugh. Anyway, we'll see. But like I said, Batman does become Batman, obviously. He figures out that Two-Face is doing Two-Face stuff, and I love the blue and gray and yellow Batman uniform. And I understand why, like, the new uniforms that are in the comics and like in the Batman movie that will be coming out, he's rich, like he can afford the newest, best technology whenever he wants, and he can upgrade things whenever he wants, because instead of donating to make Gotham City better, he just decides to vigilante. Okay, anyways, I love that classic suit. I think it looks really great. I think it's so evocative of classic Batman. I don't know, I was like, when I saw it in the pages, there's this one full page spread of him in his suit. It made me happy. Like, I had a real visceral reaction to it. And I'm not like a huge Batman fan. I like Batman enough, but it's okay. But I loved that. I really did. And that being said, I think that this comic is really beautiful. I think it's really, the art is really, the way that a lot of panels are used is really thoughtful and smart and does a really good job storytelling. Yeah, I think that the way that this is constructed as a comic makes me want to read more, which I think is really promising. I think it is a little outdated though. For instance, there is one panel when Batman freshly returns. Of course, it's all over the news, and the news and news anchors are a way that Frank Miller uses sort of information to push the story forward and to give you background. So you're not like overhearing conversations of other people, and you're also not like the main character isn't having to rehash everything. It's being told by a news anchor, which I think is smart, and also I love because I'm a newsie. But when the Batman first comes back, there's like a lot of controversy about whether he's a good vigilante or if he's just like out here breaking people's backs for no reason. You know what I meant. And one of the people that they interview it's just a one-off, and he says, yeah, Batman's kicking all the right butts. He'll be after the homos next. No? I know I'm reading this with my 2020 eyeballs, but like, no? And there wasn't enough around it to decide if that was like supposed to be, this wasn't a character. You have no idea whether this person was saying this as like a radical, like, or like if that's just like what a person off the street would say. I don't like being in 1986 anymore. I want to come back. I didn't like that at all. And there are little like random microaggressions like that sort of pop up because this comic is from 1986, you know? Like, one of the newscasters has the last name Chong, but all of the people have slits for eyes that are drawn as the newscasters, but it just feels wrong to my insides. You know, there are just some things in this comic, especially, I only read the first section, of course, we're just talking about the Dark Knight Returns, that just like, that's all I really have to say. There was nothing like super egregious, except for the homo thing. I don't love that. So I'm just giving you a heads up, I guess, if you wanted to read this comic. I understand that reading classic comics, you're sort of asking for this type of stuff to happen because comics, as ever, sort of reflect the society around us, right? In a lot of ways. The way that we speak, the things that we value. Yeah, so there's that. Didn't love it. There's also some funny things that are in this comic, because of the times, there was this sentence, and I will read it from my notes because, you know, it says, the American conscience died with the Kennedys. Died with the Kennedys. Right? And it's really funny, the juxtaposition, this is being said, and then right after that he was like, oh, can I get another hit of that? And you're kind of overhearing this, and it's just really illustrative of the fact that Gotham City is just a real hellhole at the moment. And you're hearing that because it's the parents of a girl who was saved by Batman from the mutants, and she is sort of seeing the bat signal, and I think that's really cool. It was a really nice, nostalgic moment to see a kid being like about the bat signal, right? Because that is sort of we have that reaction to superheroes as children. I think a lot of us, I think it's really natural, especially now. Like, comics were huge back then, but now it's like unprecedented with the movies and TV shows, and it's everywhere. You know what I mean? It's everywhere to a different level. And so I loved to see that. I loved to see that this kid from a clearly broken home sees hope in Batman after there had been so little hope because he'd been gone for so long. Now, things that were left hanging that I will learn more about in the other books within this book. Something happened to Jason Todd. Alfred and Commissioner Gordon both mentioned to Bruce, like, sorry about what happened to Jason, or like, I know you're not doing this because something happened to Jason. And I have to assume something happened to Jason via Harvey Dent, but I'm not sure, actually. And the only thing I know about Jason Todd is when he was thrown into the pit, the Lazarus pit, and came back. I'm not like a huge Jason Todd fan. I'm not against it. But, you know, so we'll find out. I'm interested to know more about that. I didn't even know Jason Todd had a role in any of this. And I'm interested to see, like, a Robin. You see the Robin suit in the Batcave, so I'm wondering who's gonna put it on. It is the tights and the underwear, so no upgrade there, but that's okay. Also, what I really loved, and I feel like we don't see enough of in modern comics, is a lot of the Batman's thought process. So, like, when he enters a room, and there are bad guys there, in this instance, the mutants, who are both in cahoots with Harvey Dent and the Joker, that he thinks, he's like, I see three men. It's dark in this corner, they're sticking together. I'm on the northeast corner, and here are the list of gadgets that I have. This one would kill them, this one would maim them, blah, blah, blah. Like, you really see that thought process, and I think that's really interesting because Bruce Wayne is a normal guy. Like, he's a normal guy who, like, got obsessed with this stuff and taught himself all of these things, and so it's interesting to see his insight. I think oftentimes we take for granted the Batman. The Batman is just the Batman, and he does Batman things. This is a non-origin story that presents you with the idea that he is fallible and just flying by the seat of his bat pants. And I appreciate that. I would say overall, this comic holds up. I'm going to keep reading, but I'm nervous. I'm nervous because of the homo thing. I'm nervous because the Joker makes me nervous, and he's clearly about to break out of, I believe he's in Arkham Asylum. And when the Joker gets involved, things get hairy, right? Things get hairy between the Batman and the Joker and basically anybody else. The homoerotic subtext between the Joker and the Batman is just off the charts. Sometimes it makes me feel weird. I don't know if it's gonna be that way in the 1986 comic that I'm reading, but we'll see. I also don't love the idea of the Joker as this like omnipotent weasel that nobody can get a hold of. Like, it seems like he should be dealt with handily, but he never is. My issues with the Joker aside. I enjoyed The Dark Knight Returns, and I'm interested to keep going, you know? I think this is a comic that a lot of people hold near and dear because it was revolutionary for the time, and also got turned into movies that a lot of people really enjoy, including me. The comic is kind of wildly different, but I appreciate it for what it is. Yeah, that's it, really. I will be honest and say that I went into reading this comic expecting that I was not going to think it was gonna hold up. Not because I didn't have faith in Frank Miller as a writer, but because it's from 1986 and things were different then, you know? shoulder pads were more intense, and lots of other things as well. And I, of course, did run into some stuff, as I expect to as I read these older comics, these classic comics. Now, a classic comic doesn't have to be old to be classic. A lot of people recommended me some really great newer classic comics, and I'm very excited to read, but I just had this one on hand, and it's been sitting on my shelf for forever, because my dad gifted it to me, because I'm like the only one of my siblings who really enjoys comics in my spare time. So, you know, I've always been kind of curious when he gifted it to me. I thumbed through it, I read a little bit, but here we are reading it a little more critically. I have 4 pages of handwritten notes. My AP Lit and language teacher would be proud of me. So thank you for joining me on this journey. This is one of hopefully many, and especially one of the series of The Dark Knight. I will be finishing the entire comic, and I will be letting you know how it goes and breaking it up into sections just like this one. If you have any questions or suggestions of books I should be reading for this series, or thoughts on The Dark Knight Returns, please let me know in the comment section below, or you can find me on Twitter, where I'm very happy to talk to you respectfully about comics discourse or anything else. I also post a lot of pictures of my dog on there, which is a great reason to follow me. But yeah, I'd love to talk to you about comics. I'd love to talk to you about classic comics and anything else. I hope you guys are taking care. I know the world is so strange right now, but please be safe. Please wear your mask. And this has been Nerd News with Destiny.